Okay, I'm giving it to Panda to read. Begin reading when ready, Panda.
Alright. PL12261 Nummus Felis, Coin of the Cat. PL1226-1, otherwise known as Nummus Felis, is a plague-level entity which has been recorded in Earth's paintings and several novels and artifacts. It is a black cat with several white stripes on it with a Sumerian coin as a collar. Nummus Felis, when in physical contact with an intelligent sapient being, gains currency according to their type of civilization at the lowest value set possible per second. A perfect example is a country from Earth called the United States, in which the user would gain a penny per second. History and discovery. The cat was rescued from an abusive household from the Rockefeller family. We have given this cat under surveillance to a loving family without them knowing about the currency. This cat is immortal and theorized to be as old as the concept of money, in which the oldest evidence of PL12261 is several scratch marks on the pyramids of Giza, caveman drawings of the cat in France, totems in Montana, ancient ships from the ancient Egyptians, ancient Egyptian, Roman, and medieval Greek age near the Mississippi, Rasputin's Journal of the Cat and its involvement in world politics. Containment and testing. Test log 1. It appears as a normal cat, in which it gives the user the lowest value of their currency, and further testing that it's morally impossible to destroy the cat for further examination, and was sent to a loving home for observation. Interview log 1. We interviewed the cat for 17 hours straight, and we have kept receiving a message from it saying meow and purr. Addendums. Addendum 1. With further testing and treatment has proven several, including human history, in which we have determined to possibly update its threat level, as it has cut one of our examinators for trying to see its belly, in which we found it justifiable to annihilate Japan.
The Violence Man, hereby referred to as PE-122, is the name for personifications of violence which appear by spontaneous generation throughout the multiverse. Instances of PE-122 are known to manifest on the scene of grotesque displays of violence, as the name implies. But how violence is measured to meet the threshold is currently unknown. Once manifest, instances of PE-122 will aim to cause the greatest amount of bloodshed, destroying anything that threatens to get in the way of that end, although they have been seen showing restraint in rare cases. Instances of PE-122 appear as large human males with clothing appropriate to athletes of the time in which they manifest, alongside distorted anatomy and proportions. As pale as porcelain. Every recorded occurrence has stood at 6'8" exactly, and shared the same vanta-black eyes and baldness, with a mouth twisted into a permanent smile that glows like the sun when opened for eating, as they do require sustenance, albeit not in the traditional sense. On occasion, as they open their mouths to eat, a bright red fluid drips out and begins to disintegrate whatever is in contact with, until eventually evaporating. This fluid, called liquid violence, is hereby PE-122-1. The one aspect which differs between specimens is musculature. Instances all appear highly toned and will appear to grow muscle as they become stronger, which would not be unusual if not for the fact that they produce muscles which do not correspond to the human body and are fully aesthetic. For example, while a regular human's rectus abdominis may seem to have up to 6 subdivisions, basic instances of PE-122 have what is colloquially known as an 8-pack, and will possess extra muscles along their arms. These muscles provide benefits. Upon death, instances of PE-122 vaporize instantly into a mist PE-122-1, which lingers for about 1 minute in Earth-like environments. Due to this, they must be opened while still alive. When vivisected, there are no discernible internal organs belonging to PE-122 besides its brain, which takes the form of a smooth sphere in the center of their heads that works by sending electrical signals through the body. Due to this, it is unknown why they bleed viscerally when wounded. Figure 1. The arm of an instance 122 left, compared to an average human, right. Muscles non-existent on the regular human are hereby marked with a red dot. To begin, instances of PE-122 simply undergo spontaneous after an area has borne witness to an act
violence. Whether an act of violence is grotesque enough seems to be dependent upon not just objective carnage left behind by the scenario, but also additional unknown variables within the subconscious minds of those who had been present at the time, such as their perception of the event and their internalized final act. One theory for why this is the case is necessary the incident must be carried to the world of forms, which then plays a role in the generation. Administrative notice. The shortfall of evidence to this theory, partly on knowledge pertaining to OS 348, it is not to be endorsed at this time. Rewrite. Besides their spontaneous generation, for fuck's generation, instances of PE-122 have other anomalous properties. When brought into, they may act as though they were people, albeit oriented toward the end of spreading carnage wherever they go. For this purpose, they do have intellect, but it is a mere facsimile, and they do not have a soul in the technical sense of the word. These are akin to machine learning model compiling training material, rather than an AI persona core being creative on its own. It is unknown precisely how the spontaneous generation occurs, but the fact that studies done on them show traces of multiple different souls' essence, it is thought that somehow the memories of the deceased are salvaged and used as a component. Yeah, I've completely given up on that. I'm going to kill my voice if I keep that up. Honestly, we might have to do this one in 2 parts. In addition to the above, instances of PE-122 possess a myriad of abilities to help meet the end towards which they are ordered. The most notable are anomalous strength and durability, as instances have the power to damage armored vehicles immediately upon generation and are hardy enough to shrug off direct hits from low-caliber firearm guns. Firearms guns? That's weird. 2 more abilities are supplemental to this end, the simpler of which is the ability to ignore wounds and regenerate rapidly to the extent that losing an arm can be regenerated within an hour. The remaining ability is more complex, and it is to be referred to as violence absorption. As has been hinted at before, these beings possess both hunger and a limited intellect. When asked what it is that they need as sustenance, as an attempt to find other ways to satiate them, they simply respond by saying that they require violence. In practice, they appear to be fulfilled through the experience of violent acts, as tests reveal those that constantly never need to stop for eating, and whether they are the ones dealing or receiving wounds has no effect on the extent to which it satiates them. That said, while they may be satisfied by merely carrying out violence, they may be seen actively gorging themselves whenever possible in spite of that. Their diet is no less peculiar, as they will consume weapons. When asked about it, they simply say that they eat violence, indicating that they consider armaments to contain the essence of violence. Though their dim wit can be difficult to decipher, this is their most notable anomalous ability, because after eating a weapon they are able to replicate its effects whenever they make an attack, whether it be unarmed or not. For example, if an instance of PE-122 hits someone with a chair, they'd typically get bludgeoned. If it had eaten a grenade, however, that chair would be blown to pieces on impact with the force of a grenade if PE-122 chooses to utilize that weapon attribute. As another, projectile weapons can grant PE-122 the ability to launch shards of bone. When well fed, it may even use multiple weapon attributes at once. This technically means using nearby objects as weapons, as they tend to do, is useless, but no instance has understood attempts to convey that, which is odd since they definitely differentiate between improvised and intended weapons, given that they use the former and eat the latter. Regardless, as it has been mentioned that they gain strength depending on whether or not they are currently well fed, it must also be said that the strength and durability they've been stated to possess above is said regarding them while neither satiated nor starved, the state which they are in immediately upon generation. It takes 72 hours of combat for them to become entirely satiated, at which point they no longer grow stronger as they fight, and after 24 hours without combat they will begin to starve, gradually weakening. Each hour spent without fighting, once starved of violence, undoes 2 hours of combat experience. Once there is no more experience to lose, if the violence man is still starving, it will enter a comatose state and lose memory of absorbed weapon properties, requiring that they be eaten again to use them. It may only come out of the comatose state through being physically wounded or sensing bloodshed in the vicinity. Throughout the course of acquiring 72 hours of combat experience, the violence man receives noticeable bursts of strength at certain benchmarks, occurring every 8 hours up until the 72nd hour. Each threshold, PE-122 gains the ability to use another weapon attribute at the same time. This means that if it has consumed a grenade and machine gun, for example, it may gain the ability to rapidly hold out its wrists and fire shards of bone, which then also explode on impact, so long as it has achieved 8 hours of combat experience. Each time it gains another attribute slot, it is referred to as having gone up a stage, with its initial stage being stage 1. At each stage, physical attributes also increase along a non-linear curve where 90% of the growth occurs in the stage's last hour, rather than a linear one where the 4-hour mark should be directly between the current stage and the next. This means that if it cannot be put down before it starts to noticeably scale, it is advised that they be starved out instead. One final note regarding their biology: while they are referred to by the masculine article due to their skeletal structure and anatomy being more closely aligned to the male sex, they are technically without gender. This line of research began before finding evidence for spontaneous generation, when the former lead biologist, Dr. Cytherea, eagerly volunteered to do research for the sake of understanding their propagation and finding other ways to satiate their thirst for violence. She found that they lacked the instruments of propagation with which mammals are commonly found, for the digestive tract. After she was executed for scientific on account of the unnecessary experiments, she then attempted to kill the position of lead biologist was transferred to Dr. Williams, who found that their cells contain no DNA, but rather are filled with PE-122-1. While their work is currently a mystery, as they seemingly create energy from nothing. This is unfortunately not at a rate which can be easily utilized for a reactor of any sort. Alright, 1/4 of the way through. The first encounter with PE-122 was by the First Ascension Republic 13 years after they had been raised up, making it in 1088 of the Second Age. Versus to establish colonies, and as the Ascension Accords had not yet been put in place, they had free reign when deciding how to handle pre-existing populations. In this particular instance, they had decided to exterminate the world's civilizations, partly on account of the fact that they were deemed unlikely to assimilate if they were to be simply conquered, and partly due to the hostile reaction they had presented upon the first contact attempted by the Romans. In truth, this had been a conflict fabricated by the Praefectus Coloniae, such that he could have his casus belli and win glory for himself by conquering a hostile people. Because of the language barrier, as they hadn't yet gotten used to interacting with people from other realms at this time, this plot was successful for 3 years, during which those native to the earth of that realm were utterly devastated. Was it Praefectus?
Praefectus Coloniae.
Goose? Anyway. Where was I? On the 4th year of the war, people began to realize they had been manipulated, and the war was brought to an end by Consul Septimus Quinctius Cincinnatus. The vast power differential led to it having been made a one-sided slaughter, however, and the damage had already been done. During the first year, civilizations were decimated. Throughout the second year, colonies of the Republic began to be established, and survivors from the first year had begun to be hunted down. Over the third year, an internal conflict which had been brewing in the colony for some time had burst, and strife began between those sympathetic to the people of the realm and those who were not. Due to the enforced peace of the Unilateralists, the First Ascension Republic had scarcely seen war in a century, and what conflict it did know had been small-scaled yet fierce, nothing like the one-sided annihilation of a realm's populace. This was hard for some of them to bear, and no easier for the natives, who had lived there all their lives Those who had lived there all had their lives upturned incomprehensibly and saw death on a scale beyond their comprehension. When Consul Cincinnatus arrived to bring peace and calm each side, he was met with a wretched sight. That scene was the first of many similar events throughout the multiverse, but being the first of its kind, it also had the largest impact, for men had not yet been numbed to things of that sort. The shock as news broke and people realized just what had happened during the investigation of the Praefectus was spread far and wide, resulting in a shockwave that rippled throughout the conceptual consciousness, though we knew not what that was at the time. Alright, I'm gonna take a break. This is fucking long. Consul Cincinnatus had just finished forcing the leaders of the colony and the revolt to sit down together for a diplomatic talk after having arrested the corrupt Praefectus Coloniae when they all received reports that someone had decided to ignore the ceasefire. It was initially debated whose side this individual was on, and this led to some minor skirmishes between groups which thought the conflict had started up once more, but it soon became obvious that this individual was killing indiscriminately. Honestly, it doesn't matter if he's recording, no one's going to read. After both sides agreed to cooperate against the monster that had arisen, although that would severely backfire. Kill squads had been sent against it, but their inability to finish it off only served to make it stronger. By the time that they realized that it grows stronger from combat and due to regeneration had to be killed fast to prevent adaptation, it was too late. They sent in a battleship to take care of it, but by then it already had the strength to leap into the sky and grab hold, tearing the ship to pieces and consuming some of the missiles it had intended to use for bombardment. At this point, planetary evacuation was called for, and the world was abandoned while surveillance satellites kept watch from orbit. Eventually, when that instance of PE-122 was starved by the lack of violence to commit and available weaponry, it reverted to a lesser stage and eventually fell into a coma. When people returned to the planet, they locked PE-122 away by entombing it within a solid block of alchemite with only its head exposed and requested assistance from the Unilateralists. Unilateralist oversight began for the containment of PE-122. There was one security breach when it was found that violent acts within the proximity of the entity also resulted in growing its strength, leading to it breaking free once it had grown strong enough. Improved containment measures were developed after the fact, and eventually there were reports of another instance occurring. Until then, it had been thought to be a unique case, but many witnesses and media outlets reported that they believed what they saw, and what they saw was another instance. An investigation eventually revealed that this was true, and it was dealt with accordingly with the procedures that were developed for future occurrences. Further security breaches occurred on various occasions, but with containment procedures adapted each time and multiple options being made extant for the containment of this anomaly, it was eventually deemed safe that unilateralist oversight may be lessened. As of the present day, it is legal for multiversal nations to keep instances of PE-122 within their own government facilities. Alright, last paragraph and then I'm done. Figure 2. A sketch from a witness to the first minutes of the second instance. It reportedly followed an admiral who had just upgraded his cybernet augmentations into the restroom and challenged him to a fight which escalated to include the entire bar. He was stationed on a war-torn planet which had just ended a long span of peacetime and became a multiversal hub, which affirms the theory that the necessary bar for what counts as grotesque violence is lower for people unaccustomed to bloodshed, at least when it comes to the manifestation of PE-122. Alright, I'm done. I'm finished. I'm not going to kill my voice for this.
Containment and testing. Containment procedures. Instances of the Violence Man are to be kept on Class I-1 facilities without any other sapient anomalies in containment. Preferably, though not definitively, these ought to be on asteroids such that there may be limited area which must be searched in the event of a containment breach. They must either remain in cryostasis or be constantly kept sedated through the approved brain implants. Unwanted specimens are to be disposed of through solar incineration. Test log 1 generation. In order to determine how instances of the Violence Man came to be, biological experiments were first done with metaphysical explanations being explored after those were revealed as a dead end. Test 1-1 Biological spread. Scientists proposed theories that there may have been sort of transformation when the Violence Man was first recorded to appear, and that the specimen in containment was once human. The area was swept for biological and paranormal infectants, to no avail. Scans revealed the internals of the Violence Man to be remarkably sterile. This determined that unlike PE-283, animate blood, or PE-312, night sworn, there was no curse or disease that could have started this. Test log 1-2 Propagation. Seeing that the next obvious method was to investigate whether their biology had any clues, the lead biologist, Dr. Cytherea, was appointed to begin investigations. She began by investigating whether they could propagate through normal means. Although this was clearly unnecessary given that it would have been more obvious that the species priorly been extant on the planet that it was found for long enough that could be raised. She soon found that they in fact are not capable of such acts, and then took more drastic measures. Those led nowhere and resulted in her removal from the project. Test 1-3.1 Cell Structure. The new lead biologist, Dr. Williams, had decided to run some experiments on sample cells from PE-122. He found that the cells were unlike anything he had ever seen before, and contained a fluid akin to one which can be seen dripping from the mouths as they eat. This fluid was found to act with similarity to PO-019 instant kill solution, when some spilled upon an assistant at his laboratory, who instantly dropped to the ground in horrible pain before dying. IKS is more effective, given that it kills without the drama beforehand. Each cell seems able to propel itself independently without outside forces, perhaps leading to anomalous strength. What do you mean I'm in a nerd screen? Test 1-3.2 Cell Formation. When one lab assistant had playfully punched another's shoulder, a petri dish was seen shaking, which led to a branch-wide quarantine. Once it was safe to say the area was safe, Dr. Williams noticed that the cells in the petri dish seemed to have replicated. Further tests have shown that being in the presence of violent actions results in the growth of the Violence Man cells, but what they will not grow into is an entirely new entity on its own, simply remaining as an expanding mass of anomalous flesh. This seems to clue us in on its regenerative functions. Test 1-4 Metaphysical Explanations. After it was determined that the species cannot propagate itself, and more instances happen to be found with time, one scientist floated the conceptual idea of spontaneous generation, due to the fact that instances of the Violence Man occurred in times when the local population had just experienced unprecedented violence, at least for those alive at the time. He suggested that it was a manifestation of the impact of the collective conscious. That Violence Man is the idea of violence itself made manifest. That was the idea of Dr. Shepard, who had always been a gentle man with a little stomach for the more brutal parts of his job. For he had been recruited from the nations of the multiverse on account of his intellect, rather than from hunt facilities like most of our scientists. To maximize the psychological impact, he made to destroy all colonized worlds with his own home universe. This was psychologically devastating, but yielded no results with regards to making the instance of the Violence Man manifest. It was decided that merely pushing a button may not have been personal enough, and so several minor nations that were on the extermination list were then made to fight one another through an orchestrated conflict. The Republic intended to intervene, but was stopped when the year Consul Titus succumbed to blackmail. He would later be exposed for this, and further strife would reign through that period of 10 years that followed. On the 9th year, another instance of the Violence Man was spotted, contained, and the war concluded. At this point, the thought arose that the standard of being psychologically devastating must be determined based on how inured the populace is to violent actions, and the extent of the damage required in this instance was greater due to the growing familiarity of the people of the multiverse with war. Under Protocol Metaphysics 04, which enforces the strict doctrine of strict avoidance on the issue of studying non-reproducible anomalous effects unless necessary to stop a class-divine threat or greater from growing out of hand, testing on the manifestation process of the Violence Man was then indefinitely postponed. Further sub-study is subject to the Council approval due to the need to interact with the Fox Apostles, OS-348-1. I said, oh wait, is it foe? Or, yeah, foe, sorry. Test log 2. Potential abilities. In order to determine the attributes of the Violence Man, alongside whether it may be deployed as a tool for our own benefit, the Violence Man was first put through rigorous physical examination to ensure that it would not be destroyed by accident. Then exposed to gradual increasing forces. After it was determined that it is very durable and has great potential, ways to control it began to be investigated, followed by tests of its effectiveness in the field. Test 2-1 Physical Examination. The Violence Man was placed in an empty 10 by 10 by 10 meter room, and the atmosphere was rapidly taken out, making it into a vacuum. The entire time, there were no worthwhile effects on the vitals of the Violence Man, as it withstood the vacuum without issue. Closer examination showed that each cell in its body output heat from the energy spent retaining its shape. As they pulled toward each other to prevent suffering tissue damage, as they pulled towards each other to prevent suffering tissue damage from the sudden depressurization. Afterward, the Violence Man was exposed to 1,000 MSV of radiation over the span of 1 second. No cellular damage was observed, likely due to the fact that the cells do not contain DNA. This was then ramped up to 1,000 MSV in increments of 1,000 MSV until reaching 10,000 with no effect. After increasing, the exposure was increased to a constant flow of 10,000 MSV per second and left for 6 hours, it was determined safe to consider it immune to radiation. The next test gradually increased the heat of the chamber, which did begin to melt its body. It immediately tore off its restraints, but failed to tear through the chamber walls due to the alchemite-trumite alloy repairing itself faster than it received damage. Although there were battleships on standby around the research ship to handle the situation, it did not grow in strength as seen from its rampage across the planet's surface. The temperature turned down once it became clear that it would be unable to resist the heat for much longer. The next experiment was the opposite of the last, and after its regenerative power brought it back to full vitality from its exterminates, having been burnt to stubs at half their prior length, the chamber's temperature was drastically reduced. Hey man, I'm kind of like sick right now, so I'm not operating at my full capacity. It fell into, oh my god, a comatose state and awoke when thawed out. Tests done while it was comatose. Comatose. Oh my god, dude. Comatose. Reveal that its brain functions dropped to negligible level. And it fails to react when shot. Furthermore, once frozen, they are easily fractured apart. That contrasts greatly with their normal endurance, as under regular circumstances, the Stage 1 instances of the Violence Man used for testing was capable of resisting a hydraulic press until the force had exceeded 100 tons, at which point it began to buckle under the weight and suffer physical damage. It is not as durable against raw pressure as weapons, however. Bullets would embed in the body of the Violence Man, and blades would still cut, although dulling in the process. Regardless of what injuries were received, this did not inhibit its motor functions. The only way found to cause it to stagger or falter in ability was found to be the removal of an entire limb. Since even having its torso caved in would not prevent the Violence Man from running at full sprint. The bodily damage dealt to the Violence Man resulted in growing vastly in strength, which resulted in the experiment being called off. Next time, Agent should just read his own, as punishment for making it so long. Test 2-2, Weapon Replication. After the previous test showed to be both strong and durable, experiments upon its ability to replicate the effects of weapons commenced. The Violence Man was placed upon a barren world where one abyssal drake was introduced to fight it. This creature was chosen for its unbalanced ratio of durability to attack power, providing the potential for drawn-out fights. And the first fight was intended to provide a control sample to compare to future matches in which other variables were added. It was defeated by simply grappling and bludgeoning, which indicates that once it eats weapons, it only has the ability to replicate their forms for a limited period of time. Given that it had consumed the firearms of soldiers sent to attack it, and their artillery munitions during initial recovery. The control fight had lasted 7 hours plus 36 minutes, and due to its noticeable growth in its strength throughout the spar, it was starved of combat for 1 week before being introduced to another opponent, as to starve it back to its weaker state. Following that, a longsword was deposited by drone without hesitation. It opened its mouth to swallow the sword entirely. Once another abyssal drake was sent in, it was then observed that repeat blows from the Violence Man left lacerations in the beast. Once it was knocked down, the Violence Man grabbed it by the neck with its left hand before making a swipe with the right that cleaved off its head like a blade. The fight had taken 7 hours plus 8 minutes. Interestingly, it was noted that force output from punches started higher than before, despite being starved. Testing indicates that consuming instruments for violence will also result in its strength. For the third fight, the Violence Man was given another blade to consume, alongside a grenade. The result was that punches left lacerations for 6 hours, before then causing explosions upon impact. Observations note vulnerability to its own explosions, and getting knocked back after each blow for the first 22 minutes with the imbued attribute. The Abyssal Drake was slain 30 minutes later, making the total fight 6 hours plus 52 minutes. Another one was introduced without the usual wait, as to replicate a prior behavior. After 8 minutes, the Violence Man was only received a sudden burst of strength, but also managed to merge weapon attributes with its body. Its next move was to uppercut the creature's jaw, resulting in its head not merely exploding, but the rest of its body being sliced in half vertically. This was indicative, as proven by future experiments, that weapon attributes grow alongside its strength. Furthermore, that until stage 2, it may only replicate the effect of a single weapon at a time. As one final test, it was more starved, then placed on an uncontacted world with a sapient species. It began to tear through the planet's population, as expected, and was observed as it went on its rampage. It would still consume weaponry as usual, but would often pick up items that were not meant for combat, such as furniture when it was at stage 1 to hit people with. During its recovery and containment, it was seen doing this, which is nonsensical due to the fact that its body was offensive, has its offensive capacities of any weapon it eats. Observation then revealed that it is not necessarily the body imbued with the effects of the weapon, but any attack made by the Violence Man, which will carry the attribute of weapons consumed. This actually makes weapons an aesthetic choice, as it can hit someone with a chair and cause the same damage that striking them with a sword would deal, but seems not to care for aesthetics, rather simply choosing this arbitrarily. It seems to only use everyday objects, not meant for combat, to hit people with, as it merely eats weapons and obtains on the spot. After it had been seen fighting for long enough, the planet was destroyed by kinetic bombardment, and the Violence Man was collected from its planetary debris after starving back to stage 1. Test 2-3 Controllability. Once it became the case that multiple instances were in storage, and thus a non-issue if one were to be defeated in combat, it was put forth that they be controlled and weaponized. It had not yet been confirmed whether they were capable of dying, although it was presumed possible after the near destruction during the temperature resistance experiment, which is why it was not authorized for weaponization before that point. As early research had shown that they do in fact have brains despite their lack of other organs, and the fact that their brain is simply a smooth sphere within the center of their heads that works by sending electrical signals throughout the body, this became the new focus. Firstly, it was found that they die if their brain is removed, but also if the regeneration is simply overwhelmed, which can be done if the body is sufficiently pulverized. While capable of standing with a hole through its torso, it can't come back from being reduced to a smear on the ground. Since the vitality of the Violence Man was deemed sufficient before surviving the procedure. Study was then put toward the development of neurological implants, which was difficult given unconventional biology. The sphere that acted as its brain was found to be incredibly dense. After 2,740 test subjects were killed in the making of this device, along with 20% of instances of the Violence Man in storage, there was a success in making a device to dampen signals throughout the whole being's body. While it was and still is not fully effective, the developed implants make the Violence Man highly susceptible to suggestion. Furthermore, it may shock the brain remotely to disable movement. Test 2-4 Field Test. Once the Violence Man was approved as a weapon, it became mandated that one instance at each stage constantly be kept in storage, such that one best fit for each scenario may be deployed on demand. In order to test its utility as a containment tool for further anomalies, a security breach was made to occur at a facility owned by FAR through the remote disabling of electric flow to the shackles of the instance of NE-43. Hecatoncheires, which
It's
was
Hecatoncheires.
Hecatoncheires,
Correct.
which was imprisoned in such a way that it appeared to be a malfunction of their own system. The prison world then began evacuations, and the Republic called for aid. After the instance of NE-43 overcame sedation, as was necessary to test the Violence Man against a full-strength target, the Unilateralis response arrived. In order to avoid the potential diplomatic repercussions of waiting for a threat to grow before responding to it, it was made to look as though there were technical delays on their end by exploiting a backdoor within the Republic's communications network. And a problematic senator was framed for having leaked credentials to their mainframe as a recover. Stage 7 through 9 instances of the Violence Man were released to combat the target. Notably, it was found to be impossible that they were made to hold back, which was a risk with this recontainment mission. Despite that, we are now able to point them in the right direction to focus their intentions by suggesting to their impaired cognition. Various fallback plans were prepared in the event that they began to rampage through unintended targets caught in the crossfire. This had turned out to be unnecessary though, as they showed surprising restraint in that they focused on the instance NE-43, which we had attended them to. Further studies show it to be the case that they will ignore weaker targets when it is possible for them to fight a stronger one. The NE-43 instance was digging beneath the ground at a rapid pace with its hundred hands to evade ships, which had taken off to intercept it. And we responded by loading the instances of the Violence Man into bunker busters to drop from overhead onto it. Soon after, the ground burst open due to its tectonic control powers of NE-43. This explosion of the planet's surface caused great desolation within a 72-mile radius, which resulted in the destruction of the station, which acted as housing for the workers who maintained the anomaly containment systems. This buried all instances beneath rubble, though they soon climbed out to chase down NE-43 soon after. The Stage 7 instance was the first to climb to the surface, as it had been buried less deeply. It caught up to NE-43 and fought against it for 18 minutes before NE-43 managed to pin it down to the ground and pummel it with all 100 hands for 4 more minutes, at which point the regenerative properties faltered. It is hard to tell when exactly life ceased in the Violence Man, since vision was obstructed by NE-43. But it didn't die without purpose. Even if NE-43 was uninjured due to Stage 7 having insufficient strength, this gave Stage 8 and 9 time to unbury themselves.
Once Stage 8 and 9 were freed, they began to combat NE-043. Stage 8 was able to survive being grabbed and crushed within the grasp of 17 of its opponent's large hands for enough time that Stage 9 could cause NE-043 to stagger and let go. Upon being released from its grasp, Stage 8 was seen to have 2 broken legs and 1 broken arm, but they snapped into place and healed before, I'm just going to start calling it the 100-hander because that's what they're, before the 100-hander was able to get up. Stage 9, meanwhile, was not dealing much damage, but it was managing to survive fairly well against such a fearsome foe due to its regeneration. This was a great advantage considering the 100-hander was incapable of regeneration to such an extent and was gradually beginning to be worn down, just like our fucking throats. By that point, 8 arms had been broken. It continued to be the case that one of them would be brought to the brink of death, that when one of them would be brought to the brink of death, the other would free it and then distract it while the other healed before being wounded itself. This went for some time until Stage 9 was slain, which occurred once Stage 8 had received injuries that it could not heal from quickly enough to get up and distract the 100-hander once again. Since only Stage 8 was left and it could do only minor damage on its own, this made it seem as though the fight was nearly over. But when it was about to be finished off, unable to hold its own, it had struck the time limit. Having gained enough hours of combat experience, it began to rapidly grow in strength and replace the fallen Stage 9 instance. Of course, even in its strongest state at the borderline between Plague and Nova-class threats, it stood no chance. It was able to survive on its own for a short while, but only for another hour. The 2 instances tag-teaming the 100-hander were able to disable the use of 1 leg, tear off 5 of its heads, and break another 36 arms before the initial Stage 9's death. The 1 remaining instance took down another 12 arms and before growing to Stage 9 as well, and then tore off 3 heads and disabled 17 arms before dying. This left the 100-hander having been rather wounded, but victorious nonetheless. It lost the usage of 1 leg, 8 of 100 heads, and 61 of 100 arms during that fight. With blood loss factored in, this weakened it enough for the combat ship that had dropped the Violence Men into the fight to return and finish the job, since it was unable to block projectiles as easily with its arm. Once the 100-hander was contained once more, the Republic gave its thanks for our support. Fuck you, Agent. Alright. PE-999 Mycelium Transfer Protocol. Overview. Mycelium, hereby referred to as PE-9999, is an extremely thin web capable of transferring large amounts of data between organic organisms. The Shruminati have adapted this technology as a superior alternative to typical hive mind data transfer protocol. Mycelium acts as a web-based wiring that sticks to any surface. It is extremely thin and almost invisible to the naked eye. Through a microscope, Mycelium looks like an extremely cluttered layer of white electrical wires. Mycelium can connect to members of the Shruminati as an alternative to typical hive mind data transfer protocol. 4. This is done simply with Mycelium on any part of the body. Attached, it cannot be detached due to its extremely sticky potency. However, it can easily be removed. Mycelium was created by the Shruminati R&D team during Project. The goal of Project TP was to create a hive mind data transfer protocol with faster speeds than Spore. They managed to create the substance of mycelium with organic materials and a fungus capable of growing at an extremely rapid pace. Mycelium was given a test trial and research facility redacted. The entire building's interior was coated in a layer of mycelium. Initial tests proved to be highly promising, showing data transfer rate improvement of at least 300 times. After these initial tests, mycelium was adopted into all other major Shumanati facilities. See, Agent, you don't have to write 15 pages. PE 2007-1. Hatsune Miku, the first Baka. Hatsune Miku, referred to as PE 2007-1, is a Japanese Vocaloid that roots itself in the minds of all especially stupid individuals. The initial instance of this anomaly is a high school-age girl with long cyan pigtails, but new instances can wildly change appearance so long as it retains blue pigtails. The anomaly roots itself into people's minds and causes them to develop an obsession with itself and even create new instances of Hatsune Miku. There are some instances that are wildly different. Red hair that has drill shapes rather than pigtails, but there is debate as to whether this is Hatsune Miku or another anomaly. It does not appear that is dangerous, simply infectious. The anomaly was first made by a Japanese Vocaloid company. The original instance, PE 2007-1, is contained, as well as various other instances, but given its infectious nature, totally difficult. I have entered contact with Hatsune Miku. I do not currently understand the appeal of this thing. I tried to interact with it, but it has not done much. Test log 2. This time I have made contact with Hatsune Miku and it had performed a song. It was interesting, but not really to my taste. I do not know if I am or if it is simply not trying to infect me. Test log 3. Hatsune Miku has performed a song that I am familiar with. It was actually kinda neat. I may try to fast-track testing to see what else it can do. Test log 4. Upon meeting with Hatsune Miku, there was a new instance which will be known as PE 2007-182. There are already 181 other instances in containment. This one has red hair and an odd drill hairstyle. It kind of looks like a dictator outfit. This one has much better English than Hatsune Miku. I think I prefer this version of it. Test log 5. PE 2007-182 is cool as hell. I love this funky thing. Addendum 1. Dude, check out my PE 2007-182 OC. I call it Casanito Tatolini with a crossover from Wadolf Luigitler. PO82, the Rubberbanding Band. The band of rubber banding, hereby referred to as PE82, is a typical rubber band which, when pulled back and released, causes whatever gets to warp to the location where it was exactly 10 minutes ago. They were found to be produced by a factory, PO82-1, which was made inoperable in 532 of the Third Age. Attempts to fix the factory resumed production of rubber bands, but they lacked any anomalous properties. PE82 looks exactly like your typical beige-colored rubber band. Unstretched, it has a diameter of 2 inches and it may be pulled up to 1 foot before snapping. When snapped against a solid surface, such as when a person puts it around their wrist and then pulls it back before releasing, the object it had snapped against will warp back to its position 10 minutes prior. This is relative to the local frame, meaning that those on a planet's surface do not reappear in space. Furthermore, it does not work by destroying and reconstructing the user's body like a teleporter, making it safe for civilian usage. Containment and test. Tens of 10,000 instances of PO82 are to be kept in Class S1 containment, while it is permitted that the remainder multiverse. PO82- its anomalous properties is to be kept as a museum under unilateralist supervision in case of the event that its properties are to one day return. Test log 1. Transmission. Test 1-1 Target Criteria. PO82 was of a test subject who was then told to snap it. The subject warped to the other side of the test chamber where he had been sitting. Following that, he was taken to a plane and told to snap it while in flight. He appeared behind the plane and fell to his death. When a new subject was taken to a moon and told to snap it after walking around for some time, she appeared where she stood 10 minutes ago on the moon's surface. This indicates that the frame of reference is defined by the gravitational field most acting upon the body. After that, PO82 was wrapped around a glass of water, picked up, and carried across the room when 10 minutes had passed. When snapped, the glass warped back with its contents included. Test 1-2 Velocity Carryover. PO82 was wrapped around the wrist of a test subject who was dropped from 8 miles and then snapped the band to attempt returning to the platform. The subject appeared on the platform but maintained velocity, resulting in immediately being slammed against the floor at maximum velocity. This indicates that velocity is carried over.